It's been an amazing fall and we've had some success in the deer woods, and we've got a beautiful hind-quarter of venison sitting here on the table, and we're gonna show you how to butcher this thing. So there are 5 main cuts that we're going through today, and we've got the sirloin, the top round, the bottom round, the eye of round, and the shank. This thing might look a little intimidating, and trust me that once you learn these cuts, it's definitely not. One thing that I like to make sure that I always have is a sharp knife, and I like to make sure that I have a boning knife or a chef knife, something with a really sharp tip on it. This is the part of the knife that is the most important when we're going through this. Now, seaming is everything. Seaming is the important word here, and all of these muscle groups are going to come apart in their own little sections, and we're just following seams of meat, and in between those pieces of meat, once you run your knife through those seams, things just fall apart really naturally, and I'm gonna show you how that's done. So where we start is right on the front of the leg here. You can see this big bulbous muscle, and this is the sirloin. The sirloin has a little cap on it here. So this sirloin cap, on a beef, it would be a large cut of meat. It's pretty small on a deer. So you can use this and throw this into the grind pile, use it for stewing meat. But we just wanna take this piece of meat off first. So we'll start by finding a seam just on top of the sirloin here. And at no point am I cutting through any meat here. I'm basically following those lines, working my knife around those lines, and taking each piece of meat off. There's our sirloin cap. Again, put that off to the side. Now, once that's off, you can see that this big bulb here, this is the sirloin. There's a seam here and a little bit of a casing, let's say, around the sirloin, and we just need to slice around it. And this is where you don't want to be afraid to get your fingers and everything. The more you work your fingers underneath all the tissue and in between the seams, the more you can see it just sort of pull apart, and anywhere you can get your knife in between those seams is perfect. So I'm going to go in right above the kneecap and cut down at an angle and start to loosen up that sirloin. And the more you dig in there, you'll see that there's a bone right underneath it. So you want to sever the connective tissue from the top and from the bottom, and that muscle should release. So there's our sirloin, big, beautiful chunk of meat. I've got my trim pile already here, and we're gonna put our sirloin down right there. And next we're going to do the bottom round. This is sort of a longer, flatter piece of meat. And again, all we're doing is following the seams. So we come up to the top part of the leg, and you can see this seam right here, and we wanna just follow that down with the knife. And again, here I'm not cutting any meat. I'm not actually cutting through any muscle tissue. I'm just disconnecting stuff. So we're pulling seams apart, and if you still have any bone attached to your quarter at all, just cut the muscle tissue away from the meat, and you'll be in good shape, and you'll start to see how it all comes apart. And there's our bottom round, another giant, beautiful chunk of meat, and I'm gonna put it right here next to our sirloin. So as you're working between the bottom round and the top round, what you'll notice is there's this long strand of meat that sort of just comes apart, and it's sandwiched in between the two of them. So you can trim that out really quickly, remove the tissue, and we've got a somewhat familiar looking piece of meat right here. So this looks pretty much identical to a tenderloin. Most hunters that I know don't actually know what this piece of meat is, and this is the eye of round. Beautiful chunk, again, just as valuable as a tenderloin, and that's our eye of round. I'm gonna put it right here with the other cuts. And now we'll start removing the top round. Get your knife in as tight to the bone as possible and cut all of the stuff that's connecting to the bone away from the bone, and you'll start to see this piece of meat just loosen up. Again, not cutting into the shank at all. We're releasing it from the bone. We've got the femur exposed right here really well, and we're just filleting the meat right off the femur. And there it is, just like so, nice and clean. There's our top round. Final cut is our shank, and this one could be a little bit tricky to remove, but we're not taking any meat off of the bone on this one. This whole piece of meat right here is staying on the bone. There's a little bit of piece left there, and there's a kneecap. So we're going to start working our knife underneath that kneecap to reveal the joint. And then we're just gonna pop that joint with our knife. And I'm just going to work my knife in behind this big knee joint, and everything should sort of just come apart. And there it is, the 5th and final piece, the venison shank. Any little bit of meat that you have left on the bone, just trim that off, and you can throw that into your grind pile and it still gets used. And there we have it, the 5 main cuts from the hind quarter of a deer. Now I've gone and trimmed them up a little bit. We've got the sirloin, the bottom round, the eye of round, the top round, and the shank. These 4 deserve to be cooked to a rare, to a medium rare, and I would personally cut these all into steaks. So you can cut the steaks into any size you want, and that's the main benefit of being able to butcher on your own. And for other purposes, you can take any of these cuts and slice them thin and make jerky. You can do stir fries with it. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. I personally love eating a big juicy steak, and that's what I would use all of these cuts for. And then we've got the shank, and this is an extremely underrated piece of meat on the deer. Often it'll get cut up and thrown into the ground pile, but this piece with the bone in can be slow cooked in the oven with some liquid. I like to use beer, whiskey, wine. You can use chicken stock, beef stock, anything. It'll be the most delicious piece of venison that you've ever had. So that's how you go about deboning and butchering the hind-quarter of a deer. So I hope you learned something about this process, and for more information, check the blog post link below.